This is the MacPherson Angle.
Well, good evening and welcome to the program. Here's what's coming up on the MacPherson Angle tonight. We know current levels of mass migration are causing a housing shortage, but there's now warnings we could have a significant food shortage if current trends are not addressed. The Australian organisation providing guidance for the way our doctors treat kids with gender dysphoria have just admitted their advice is not based on medical evidence so much as opinion. So where does that leave our most vulnerable kids and their families? Dr. Gillian Spencer will join me shortly. And what lessons can we learn from the death of Cambridge University's youngest ever black professor who'd faced intense scrutiny about his fantastical resume? I'll talk to Tom Slater a little later in the show. But first, want to know how pathetically weak our defence force has become under the Albanese government? Well, our soldiers have been told that when swarms of unidentified drones invade airspace around our military bases, they should, and I quote, ensure window blinds are closed. Dear Lord, what will our soldiers be instructed to do if those drones ever drop bombs? Hold hands under their desks? The Daily Telegraph revealed last week that drones have been allowed to repeatedly fly in restricted airspace over our Air Force bases. None of the mysterious drones have ever been shot down. Our soldiers have counted them, though. There were 21 incursions in the 22-23 financial year. That grew to 60 incursions in 23-24, and there were an astonishing 147 drone incursions last financial year, all of which means drone incursions at our military bases are growing at a faster rate than Anthony Albanese's knows. Now, the drones might just be toys operated by kids. Perhaps the unmanned devices are being flown by harmless enthusiasts who are still kind of getting the hang of remote-controlled flight. I mean, the first drone I ever bought for my kids disappeared over a neighbour's fence, never to be found again, not 5 minutes after we unpacked it from its box. But there's another possibility. Maybe the drones are being controlled by foreign agents conducting surveillance on our military installations. And the concern is that our government hasn't a clue who's behind the drone incursions. Could be a kid, could be a dad in an adjacent suburb who never reads instructions, which we all admit does not narrow the field down much. Or it could be a lieutenant of the IRGC. The Defence Force appears to have no more idea than you or I. It's not all bad news, though. I'm reliably informed that when they draw the curtains on the windows at our military bases, the drones magically disappear. The Daily Telegraph reported that unidentified drones had been sighted over Amberley Air Force Base in Brisbane, over Richmond Air Force Base on the outskirts of Sydney, over Townsville Air Force Base in North Queensland, and over Edinburgh Air Force Base outside Adelaide. So it all seems very random, doesn't it? The spokesperson for Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles told journalists, and I quote, "These incidents are treated seriously, which is why Defence is working closely with the appropriate authorities." They're treating these incidents so seriously, the incidents have increased by 635% in just 3 years. Imagine if they weren't treating them seriously. When reporters asked Defence Industry Minister Pat Conroy about the increase in drones flying over military installations, he replied that drones were, quote, something we're seeing more often at military installations. If you ever wonder why Pat Conroy is in charge of defence industry and not defence intelligence, well, now you know. Conroy wasn't finished, though. He told the media it's not something that people should be doing. Like, from a basic common sense point of view, anything that has the ability to interrupt air operations or endanger lives is very silly, and people shouldn't be doing it. Well, if the drones are being operated by the Chinese or by the Iranians, well, like, now they've been told it's very silly and, like, not something they should be doing. Why do we even need a defence force when we've got Pat Conroy's stern words to shoo away the drones? The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, dodged questions about the drones, which must have made a pleasant change from dodging questions about melons. But I digress. When asked whether ASIO should investigate 147 drone incursions over restricted airspace at some of this nation's most significant defence bases, here's what the PM said.
I want to make this point as someone as well who represents an electorate near Australia's busiest commercial airport, that It is unsafe and dangerous to have drones around airspace.
Well, I can't overstate how fortunate we are to have a Prime Minister whose lived experience living near an airport gives him such profound insights. Albanese then told journalists,
It makes no sense for that to occur.
flying drones over restricted airspace that is defended by nothing more than Venetian blinds and Pat Conroy's verbal diarrhoea makes perfect sense if you're China or Iran or North Korea or any other number of hostile actors. The PM assured Australians, however, he was addressing the situation.
One of the things that my government has done through investment in the Australian Defence Force is to make sure that we've invested something like $7 billion in capability when it comes to warfare associated with drones.
OK, and until then, our soldiers should close the blinds and never stray too far from a desk, just in case. Now, if I asked you, why did 15 Australians, most of them Jews, die on Bondi Beach last year, not a single one of you at home would answer, well, James, those people died because guns killed them. Yes, guns were used in the attack, but those Jewish Australians were killed by alleged radical Islamists. That's what radical Islamists do. They kill Jews. If they can't kill Jews, well, they're quite partial to killing Christians. We see it all around the world, as the pro-Palestinian Kefir Brigade love to remind us. What do they say again? From Gadigal to Gaza? Radical Islamists kill people with guns. And if they can't get guns, radical Islamists use knives. If they can't get knives, radical Islamists use cars or planes or whatever else they can get their hands on. We all know this. Well, we all know this. I'm not sure the Prime Minister does. Here he was speaking in Sydney this morning.
Following the deeply anti-Semitic terrorist attack on Bondi Beach on the 14th of December 2025, National Cabinet stood in solidarity and met the next day. We agreed to action to eradicate anti-Semitism and to strengthen gun laws across the nation.
So there you have it. Following a terrorist attack, National Cabinet decided to eradicate anti-Semitism by strengthening gun laws. What's infuriating to me is the PM still can't bring himself to say anything about Islam, which, as the term radical Islam implies, would seem to be the seedbed of this anti-Semitism he claims to want to eradicate. If you want to eradicate the anti-Semitism that leads to Jewish synagogues being attacked and Jewish Australians being murdered, maybe look at where the murderous anti-Semitism is coming from. Maybe stop importing people from places where Islamic radicalism is flourishing. Maybe stop repatriating people who left these shores to join ISIS. The problem, of course, is that Labor wants to eradicate anti-Semitism. They just don't want to upset one of their core constituencies. So we end up with rubbish like this from the normally sensible New South Wales Premier, Chris Minns.
And we're doing this deliberately to get guns out of circulation in our community, to ensure that we don't have another terrorism event, or do everything we possibly can to ensure we don't have another terrorism event in our state.
Seriously, this is federal Labor's version of Victoria's machete bin policy. It'll be about as effective, which is to say it won't do anything to stop radical Islamic terror attacks. Here's New South Wales opposition leader Kelly Sloan.
To suggest a gun buyback is going to solve this for us, is going to stop another Bondi, it's absolute bullshit. And I'm sorry for the language, it's entirely unlike me, but I am frustrated. And we need to make sure that we are addressing the real enemy. I can tell you, the real enemy is not a farmer, and it is not a law-abiding sporting shooter from Sydney's West. That is not the real enemy.
And she's absolutely right. Law-abiding people will hand back their guns. And I know Anthony Albanese will find this difficult to get his head around, but bad guys won't hand back their guns. Here's another thing the Prime Minister should understand. Guns don't hate people. Knives don't hate people. Cars don't hate people. Actually, I once owned a Datsun 180B that I'm pretty sure hated me, but you know what I'm saying. Radical Islamists, they hate Jews. They want to kill Jews. So instead of buying back guns, perhaps we should try something genuinely radical. Why don't we send back radical Islamists? Joining me now is Nationals MP Anne Webster. Anne, thanks for coming on the program. Do you think the gun buyback is a sensible response to Islamic terrorism?
Absolutely not, James. There is not a question that we as the Nationals have about this. Has already been tabled a bill to abolish Labor's gun buyback laws done in the Senate, and we expect it to come through to the House this week because we know that it's not law-abiding gun or firearm owners who are the problem here. As you have rightly pointed out, it is Jewish-hating Islamists who are radicalised, and that's the key problem. So going after, and we've been saying this for a year, going after law-abiding gun owners is absolutely the wrong approach.
Anthony Albanese tweeted this today. I wanted to get your thoughts. He tweeted, "Australia is the most successful multicultural nation in the world, and our Italian community have been at the heart of that for generations." I suppose, and when I read that, less than 9 months after the largest terror attack on Australian soil, I thought, I reckon that might ring a little hollow for a lot of people. We're the most successful multicultural nation on earth. Maybe we were. Could we still say that, do you think?
Oh, look, I think that we have a great deal of success. We have so many cultures who now live in Australia and have taken up Australian values. In fact, they came here because they wanted to come to the best country in the world, the best nation in the world, and we welcome them. The problem that we have is that there are elements and criminals, terrorists, who are hiding in dark holes around Australia, who are waiting to make their next attack. They are the problem. And so, you know, our law enforcement bodies need to be empowered to do everything they can to stop people coming into Australia with those values and to make sure that those who have come here and who are trouble leave, but they're not welcome here.
OK, so just on that, One Nation have come up with an interesting proposal. They want to ban immigrants from countries on DFAT's Do Not Travel list. And I kind of get it because it enables them to ban immigration from countries where radical Islam is rife. I'm thinking of Yemen, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. And they can do that while blaming DFAT rather than simply saying we're banning immigrants from countries where we believe Islam is a problem. Where the One Nation plan, I think, falls down is with countries like Ukraine, which is also on the DFAT no travel list, not because we're suggesting Ukrainians are a problem, but because Russia has invaded. Your thoughts on that policy?
Yeah, look, I think the intent, yeah, of course, we understand the point, but the Do Not Travel list is actually put out on Smart Traveller. It's level 4. It's advising Australians where not to travel in order to be safe. In 2011, we had the Japanese earthquake. Japan became a do not travel place. It didn't mean that Japan has a problem with Australia. It's just that for various reasons, places are made do not travel. And yes, Ukraine is absolutely one of those places. I think the other issue that it raises, though, James, is that we have refugees, genuine refugees, who are absolutely not safe in the countries that they currently live in and who are seeking asylum in Australia. So those issues still need to be dealt with appropriately. And, you know, the temporary protection visa is one that should give an asylum to people while proper vetting should be going on before they come, but then once they're here as well, should they come.
I want to get to food security, but just before we move on from this subject, would you be in favour of a discriminatory immigration policy where there are certain nations and certain people groups we just say, no, we're not having you?
Look, as I said, I think that there are countries where there are people who are Islamic who are not safe in the country because of other horrendous Islamic aggression and terrorism. So I think it's a very complicated little piece of policy, and I think, you know, that's why the Do Not Travel list is not appropriate. It is far more complex than that, And it takes a government who is paying attention to the real issues, radical Islam, and sorting out who is coming into the country and making sure that we are in control of those who want to live in Australia and that it's right for Australia.
You know, Anne, I think you've put your finger on something. We need a government that is paying attention. And the thing that scares me about a non-discriminatory immigration policy is if the government aren't paying attention, then we really don't know what we're bringing into the country. Staying on the theme of immigration, but changing tack slightly, we all know mass immigration is having an adverse effect on housing, but the Nationals are worried about mass immigration and food security. New data from the ABS shows food production is not keeping up with population growth. And if things continue, within a decade, we'll need to import everything from apples, butter, cheese, eggs, pork, chicken and rice. My parents would never have imagined Australia might be in a position where we needed to import such standard food items.
Look, we've just finished the Nationals Federal Conference and Matt Canavan gave this speech at the conference. It was well received. And I've got to say, it's not just about migration levels. Yes, that's very serious and it is impacting our food security for the future. But as we've discussed before, it is also the policies that this government has brought in which are railroading our farmers, which are causing large swathes of good agricultural land, prime agricultural land, to become carbon sinks and forests instead of growing food and fibre. And, you know, then we've got all the policies that Labor have been putting in place. The water buybacks, you know, the biosecurity measures, the additional costs, the red tape. It goes on and on under Labor. And it is putting Australia in a position, unthinkable position, that we may end up with a food security, a serious food security issue within a decade. I agree. My parents wouldn't have thought that could ever be a thing either.
Who would have imagined an Australia where energy security and food security were things we were talking about? It just beggars belief. Before I let you go, your colleague Lou O'Brien will bring a bill forward tomorrow seeking to mandate medical care for babies that survive an abortion. Why should people get behind this bill?
Look, this is not about, just before people lose it, this is not about women's rights. It's not about abortion. It is about the fact that when a little life is born alive from an abortion, that they are given appropriate medical care. You'd have to have a stone heart to think that that is not appropriate. So, you know, I really support Lou in his approach. I think the Australian Christian Lobby will also be in Parliament House tomorrow and we'll have, I think it's 10,000 booties, little baby booties, out the front of Canberra Parliament House. And these issues, you know, we don't like to get into them. We don't like to discuss them because they're highly emotive. And I understand all of that. But we have to look at the human rights of that little baby too.
Yeah, I believe your leader, Matt Canavan, is going to be there tomorrow, as well as Pauline Hanson and Barnaby Joyce. I really hope that Labor would come to support that bill. We'll hold our breath. Anne Webster, appreciate you joining me. Thanks so much. Well, coming up after the break, I'm going to talk to my panel about those students protesting Pauline Hanson. I'm seriously worried about our kids, but I don't know, maybe I'm overreacting. I'll find out with my panel after this. Welcome back to the program. Last week we had federal politicians like Deputy Greens leader Mehreen Faruqi encouraging teenagers to skip school and protest against Pauline Hanson.
That you're sick of one nation's racist, sexist, anti-worker and divisive politics and want to join thousands of students on Thursday, 13th August in a protest around the country? And you want my permission? Of course.
And the protests were pretty much what you'd expect from an event endorsed by the Greens, by which I mean feral.
Hanson! Hanson! Hanson!
Unbelievably, I heard some people trying to put a positive spin on the protests. They said they were encouraged to see so many young people taking an interest in politics. They were marching through the streets shouting that Pauline Hanson should F off. If that now qualifies as taking an interest in politics, it isn't just a low bar, it's beneath the floorboards. What next? Will they tell their math teacher to F off on Monday morning and when they get detention explain they were simply taking an interest in their education? If these anti-Pauline Hanson protests were a representation of Australian young people, we should be very worried.
She shouldn't be here. She's a racist, sexist bigot, and she doesn't help any of us in any way. She's not for the people. She's for the billionaires, the pedophiles, and all the old men in politics. Don't trust her. Open your brain, open your eyes, realise that she's not for you. She won't ever help you, and we need to fight against her.
I regret to inform you that young lady was one of the more coherent protesters. And then there was this guy, perfectly exposed by Avi Yemeni.
Why the scarf to anti-Pauline?
I'm pro-Palestine.
But what does that have to do with this protest?
She's a Zionist.
What does that mean?
She believes that the Jews have a place where Palestine is, that they deserve to have a right to exist in a place that has been Palestinian for hundreds of years, if not thousands.
What does Judea mean?
What news is this?
What does Judea mean?
What news is this?
Rebel News.
Rebel News.
What does Judea mean?
I don't know, bro. Tell me.
The Jews.
The Jews.
You should probably not skip a day at school.
Skip a day at school, bro. Hey, you can off.
The sad thing is that given the state of the curriculum, perfect school attendance might not help his ignorance. If anything, it might reinforce it. I'm old enough to remember when political engagement meant knowing what you believed, why you believed it, and being capable of explaining it without telling everyone who disagrees with you to F off. Apparently that's now considered elitist. So congratulations, Greens. The children may not have learned much about politics, but it does seem they've absolutely nailed the most important lesson of modern progressive activism. If you don't like someone else's opinion, you don't need to waste time arguing your case. Just scream obscenities. Joining me is my panel News24 host Gab Power and Liberal Waverley councillor Michelle Stevenson. Welcome to you both. So here's my question, help me. Do we dismiss these protests as just a bunch of kids running amok, or should we be worried about the next generation, Michelle?
Oh, I'm worried. I'm really worried if this is what we're seeing. Look, I think what we're seeing is just a growth in division, and it's being fuelled by what they're getting served on social media. Now, the Greens, they have form in this argument. We've seen what they did with the pro-Palestine movement. Now, where I am from, Waverley, Bondi Beach is my ward, we saw what the local Greens councillors did there. They drove division as well, and we see how badly that ended up. So I think the Greens need to get back to doing what they used to do. Remember when they used to care about things like the environment?
No, I don't remember that. That must have been a long
time ago. Long ago. And now they've just gone off on this tangent, and they're the ones that are fueling divisiveness. They're the ones that are fueling hate. They're the ones that are encouraging all of this.
Yeah.
What about you, Gab? Do you agree we should be worried about our young people, or can we dismiss this as a blip?
I mean, look at it. It doesn't really give you much hope for future generations. Look at those kind, tolerant, well-educated, well-articulated young people. No, I think that's as feral as it gets. And you look at the number of people that turned out and some of the messaging that we saw from that protest, very, very extreme. And I think we need to have a conversation as well, not just about the young people who attended, but also the parents and what kind of conversations are being had around the family dinner table. It's interesting. I looked at this opinion piece written in The Guardian, published by The Guardian,
God,
and the headline... Well, there's a reason for it. Check out this headline, Michelle. I protested against Pauline Hanson 28 years ago. Now my teenager is doing the same thing. So this article is basically about how they gave their daughter permission to go and attend this rally. And then, of course, she talks about how she protested against Pauline Hanson from day one, and she wears that as some sort of badge of honour. So really, I mean, we can look at the kids and how crazy they are and some of the messaging, which I know we will get to. But we've also got to look at the parents as well. What conversations?
You know, I wondered about that with some of the things we've seen already and some of the other images I'll show you. Imagine if your mum and dad looking at that online thinking, I mean, would you be proud? For instance, have a look at this kid, because amongst all the feral behaviour, There were some young people calling for Pauline Hanson to be killed. Take a look.
I'm at the students' protest against Pauline Hanson. Let's hear what they have to say.
So you guys, what would you do if Pauline Hanson were here today?
I'm not. I would shoot her. I would hit her. I would run in the way. Kill her.
Should those sort of comments be investigated by police, or it's just kids and, hey, it's just Pauline Hanson?
It's not just kids. I mean, look, it's a tough one, right? Because, you know, we do have to at some point believe in free speech, but they should not be saying stuff like this. Absolutely, hands down, should not. But this speaks to a bigger issue, and that's disenfranchised youth. The youth who feel like no one is listening to them, they're getting angry, and that anger is palpable. And then you've got people like the Greens who agitate and tell them that, you know, you have a right to be mad. And so these children think that the world is falling apart around them, and so they have to fight for what's left of it. They don't understand that there's a bigger picture at play here.
What worries me about that particular clip, Gab, is, well, I could have shown you more examples, but we chose not to because the kids looked really young.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's frightening in itself that we've got really young kids who look to me maybe 14, 13, similarly calling for Pauline Hanson to be killed. And this is not an isolated instance.
No.
We saw it with Charlie Kirk over in the UK, where you had that Conservative politician killed. Many people applauding that. This is a worry.
No, I think 100% without doubt any death threat needs to be taken seriously and should be investigated, even if it's on social media. I mean, it's just getting way too normalised. And there is evidence that there are people in the far left that are getting more and more radicalised and more extreme and are justifying violence. There's actually a YouGov poll which focuses just on the American market, but actually found that 25% of very liberal people said that violence could actually be justified to achieve a political goal. And that's compared to around 3% of conservative Americans. Of course, it should be 0. But we are seeing that. You mentioned Charlie Kirk. We've seen the assassination attempts on Donald Trump. Of course, Pauline Hanson here in Australia is seen as a bit of a Donald Trump, and any death threat should be taken seriously.
You know, you raise a really good point in terms of the comparison with Donald Trump, because the left love to compare Pauline Hanson to Donald Trump. But you can see all the things that led up to assassination attempts against Donald Trump, the language that demonised him, the riling up of the left to feel like this is an existential threat. I mean, blind Freddie can see where this is going if people don't pull back a little bit.
Yeah, and it is interesting because I do think Pauline Hanson does employ Trumpian tactics at some point. Like, she is intentionally doing a lot of that kind of play that he did, and he was very successful in it. But at the end of the day, we have these children who... Pauline Hanson isn't really as divisive as everyone likes to make out. She's just saying what a lot of people are actually thinking. Like, it's not crazy stuff that she's saying.
But politics is divisive.
I know,
mean,
it is
you're
by its very
Liberal,
nature.
I'm Labor, you're Green,
Are you really?
I'm Conservative.
Are you outing yourself on television?
Hypothetically. the point, if you don't like division, don't get involved in politics.
No, absolutely. But
there's nothing wrong with
one thing that I
arguing
learned,
over...
Absolutely, and the one thing I learned is you play the politics, you don't play the person. And what they're doing is they're making it personal because they don't know how to play the politics.
And they're brainwashing young kids who are obviously angry. A lot of them are clearly confused. Some clearly have mental health issues. I mean, one's dressed up as a clown. That's one example. There's a lot of anger, and these kids are spewing so much hate. Do they even realise what their message is, or if they're talking about actually...
I don't even remember being that angry when I was that young.
Killing someone?
Well, you know something else I noticed at these protests, and we saw an example of it earlier, that the number of young people both giving speeches and in the crowds wearing keffiyehs. In fact, pro-Palestinians set up merchandise stalls at these anti-One Nation protests. You can see there, they're selling all the pro-Palestinian paraphernalia. Gab, what do you make of that?
It's just not very original, sadly. I know all these protesters like to think that they're unique and that they are original, but we are seeing, of course, pro-Palestinian stuff appear at all these left-wing causes, at all these left-wing protests. We see them at the anti-Australia Day protest, the Invasion Day protest, anti-Pauline Hanson. I don't know how many of these people have actually spent much time over in that part of the Middle East, or if they really think their store is actually going to help the cause over there, and what the connection is with Pauline Hanson. But we keep seeing this at a lot of these left-wing protests.
Well, here's my question. Have the left been captured by Islamists?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we particularly saw it with Bondi. I saw it in the lead up to Bondi, the rise in anti-Semitism. And there was there was a real strong link between that and the pro-Palestinian movement. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that people don't fall down and follow this rhetoric. It's time and time again. Even the other night, I was having a conversation with someone about anti-Semitism and how bad it was in my neck of the woods. And they said to me, what about Islamophobia? And I could have literally shouted at their face, because I was like, name a mosque or a school where there's lots of people from Islam go to that has guards and has police outside. Like, what goes on in my neck of the woods? People do not understand. Jewish people are frightened. They're being hunted down. We saw they were hunted down, 15 of them murdered. And then for people to go, but what about Islamophobia? It really burns me up.
Right, the other thing that struck me about these protests was the sheer hypocrisy on display. So we'll finish this discussion where we began, with the Greens. Here's what Senator Fatima Payman had to say about Pauline Hanson in the Senate. Have a listen.
All that Senator Hanson does in this place is spread hatred, spread division.
And here's the independent Senator Payman at the student protest, posing with kids holding signs that say F Pauline Hanson. So when Pauline Hanson raises issues in Parliament, she's spreading hate and division. But when Fatima Payman is celebrating kids holding up those sorts of signs, well, Gab, that's a valid form of political activism.
Look at the kindness coming from that sign. The smile was right there. This is the hypocrisy, isn't it? I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah. But this is the kind, tolerant left for you. But clearly, there's a lot of people attending these rallies that really just, I think, hate the country. It's not even just about hating Pauline Hanson. As you pointed out, there was pro-Palestinian stuff. And so plenty of these causes are all kind of getting, I suppose, like swept up into one. And there's Fatima Payman with that really friendly sign, F, say, you know, I don't want to repeat it, but it's...
But even when they would stand it, like when the right stood in front of a sign that said ditch the witch, the left lost their minds, right?
Yep.
It's just like, do as I say, not as I do kind of action. I can't with the hypocrisy from the left at the moment. I just can't.
Michelle, Gab, I really appreciate you joining me on a Sunday night. Thanks so much. Good discussion. All right, coming up after the break, the organisation advising our doctors about treating kids with gender dysphoria now says their advice wasn't so much based on medical evidence as opinion, and a highly contested one at that. Imagine putting your kids through so-called gender-affirming care only to be told the science wasn't settled after all. I'll talk to Dr. Gillian Spencer after this. Australia has spent years treating children with gender dysphoria, according to guidelines from an organisation set by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Their guidelines have been the main driver of gender medicine used to treat Australian minors, recommending puberty blockers for children and then cross-sex hormones for teenagers. And if you questioned any of it, well, how dare you? This was medical science. It came from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Just one small problem. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health this week admitted its guidelines were not so much evidence-based as, well, just our opinion, and a highly contested one at that, which raises a rather awkward question. If the evidence wasn't strong enough to establish medical consensus, why are Australian children treated as though it was? Doctors are supposed to distinguish between evidence, uncertainty, and opinion. That's kind of the whole point of calling something evidence-based medicine. Yet Australian parents were repeatedly told that gender medicine was settled science, while organisations responsible for shaping that medicine were operating in a field they now concede is highly contested. The federal government is currently reviewing medical treatments for young people with gender dysphoria. Unfortunately, the review isn't expected to be finished until 2028, which is rather convenient if your policy is to wait for the evidence after you've already acted on the theory. The urgent question isn't whether gender medicine should be governed by ideology from the right or from the left. It's whether Australian kids should be subjected to irreversible medical interventions based on guidelines made by an organisation that now says that's just our highly contested opinion. Or to put it another way, the science was settled. It's just that activist medical groups forgot to tell the scientists. Joining me now is adolescent psychiatrist Dr. Gillian Spencer. Dr. Spencer, just how big an admission is this by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health?
WPATH has been finally forced to admit that its guidelines are just based on opinion, and that's because it's being sued for misleading parents and children regarding the medical basis, safety and effectiveness of gender interventions for minors. But this is actually only just the latest WPATH scandal. 2 years ago, we had the WPATH files, which were thousands of leaked emails between WPATH clinicians. And what they showed was that the clinicians were fully aware that children and adolescents lacked the emotional and cognitive ability to consent to interventions that cause infertility. And it showed that the clinicians were witnessing a range of terrible side effects and problems from the interventions. And the clinicians admitted that they were building the plane while flying it, which means that they had no knowledge of the long-term outcomes of these interventions that they were prescribing. Also, 2 years ago, when WPATH was creating these guidelines, it came to light that they had suppressed the publication of the systematic reviews that they had commissioned from the Johns Hopkins University because the findings of those reviews did not support gender interventions for minors. So we've actually known that WPATH is a dodgy organisation for a few years now.
So how much of the treatment guidelines used to treat Aussie kids can be traced back to this group?
The CAS review, the UK's CAS review, which was commissioned by the NHS in 2020, was a 4-year analysis of the research in this area, and they conducted an in-depth analysis of the various published guidelines regarding gender interventions for minors. And what they identified was circular referencing, which means that the WPATH guideline has been used by a range of organisations to justify publishing their own gender-affirming guideline. And for example, the Australian standards of care that guide the practice of Australian paediatric gender clinics reference the WPATH guidelines. So these WPATH guidelines, which are now acknowledged to be just opinion, are actually the basis upon which children across Australia and across the world have been exposed to harmful gender interventions.
And the crazy thing about this is that, and you would know this better than anybody, for years, anyone who questioned the gender-affirming treatment model of kids with gender dysphoria was accused of going against the science. And now those making the rules admit, well, that science was actually never settled.
We've had the most vicious suppression of debate about gender interventions in Australia, and it's ongoing. Our medical regulator, APRA, considers that any doctors who publicly express concerns about gender medicine and gender ideology are discriminating against trans people. And so if you speak out, you get online gender activists making a complaint to APRA, and then APRA can use that complaint to then destroy that doctor's career. And this strategy of silencing critics means that our health and government organisations don't have to face that they're implicated in a medical scandal.
I said in my introduction, the Albanese government is currently conducting a review of how we treat kids with gender dysphoria. Do you have any concerns about that review, or do you think this review is a great thing and you're confident that it will arrive at a reasonable and satisfactory conclusion?
Oh, I'm really concerned because that gender review panel has been stacked by gender activists, and they're going to make sure, or try to make sure, that the gender interventions remain available to be given to children across Australia. So that panel includes people like Professor Virginia Barbour, who compared America's efforts to wind back gender ideology to the actions of the Cambodian dictator Pol Pot. It includes the lead researcher from the Royal Children's Hospital Gender Service in Melbourne, Dr. Ken Pang. It includes gender advocate Dr. Simon Denny. So I'm really concerned that the bias within the panel is going to affect its recommendations.
You talked about people building the plane while they're flying it, a great illustration. Is it medically defensible to continue to treat kids while that review is still being done, or should they hit pause until that review is finished?
Oh, it's not defensible because we already have multiple high-quality systematic reviews of the research evidence showing that gender interventions don't improve quality of life, they don't improve mental health, and they have serious problems like infertility, lack of sexual function, and serious physical health problems. So gender interventions should not be available to any child or adolescent across Australia. And health ministers should have acted years ago to protect Australian children. We actually didn't need this NHMRC review, and we certainly don't need to wait for its findings.
One final question. Critics say you're denying life-saving treatment to vulnerable children. What do you say to them, and what do you recommend instead?
Well, these interventions have been wound back overseas without any increase in youth suicide. For example, in the UK, they haven't prescribed puberty blockers to children for gender distress since 2020, and they stopped prescribing cross-sex hormones in 2024, and they haven't had any increase in youth suicide. So this myth that these interventions are life-changing is a dangerous myth, and we do have mainstream child and youth and child and adolescent mental health services that are able to provide comprehensive assessment and management of all the conditions contributing to the child's gender distress, and take a watch and wait approach through adolescence in order to allow the child to mature before making very serious decisions about their body and their health.
Dr. Gillian Spencer, always a delight to chat. Thanks so much for coming on the program tonight. All right, we're going to go to a break, but stick around because when we come back, Cambridge University professor Jason Arday was found dead at the weekend, an absolute tragedy. So who's responsible and what lessons can be learned? Plus, a town of 300 people is about to be swamped with 1,200 male asylum seekers. We talk about civilisational suicide. Tom Slater joins me from London right after this. Cambridge University professor Jason Arday, who resigned last week amid plagiarism allegations, was found dead at the weekend. Police say his death was not suspicious. He's survived by his wife and 2 children. Arday became famous as Cambridge's youngest ever black professor, but allegations that he plagiarised large sections of his doctoral thesis were soon followed by claims that he had fabricated much of his life story.
Now Arday has fallen from grace, accused of plagiarising some of his academic writing and lying about claims he ran 600 miles in 6 days to raise money for charity. The scandal's front-page news here in the UK, and the former professor of sociology of education has now resigned.
Arday's resignation came on the same day that Cambridge, which had championed him despite his outlandish claims, announced an investigation into him. That was 11 days ago. He was found dead on Friday. Joining me now is Spiked Online editor Tom Slater. Tom, whatever Jason Arday's sins, this is horrible news.
No, it's absolutely devastating, James. What an awful, tragic end to this particular story, and your heart goes out to his friends, his family, his close colleagues who are going to be really going through it at the moment. And of course, this is happening in the middle now of a continuing kind of media maelstrom. I have to say, in the past 24 hours or so, there's been a pretty unseemly response from a lot of people online, in the media, people broadly speaking on the sort of woke left, who've just openly tried to blame the press and dissenting academics for raising these plagiarism allegations, or for raising the clear kind of fabrications, to be frank, that were involved in Arday's backstory. I think the real story here is that you had a man who was either a kind of pathological liar or just not particularly well, who could become kind of trapped in this kind of fantasy of his own making, and who should never have been put on the kind of academic or media pedestal he was put on in the first place. He was always going to be knocked down, and it's just terrible that it's had to end in such a tragic fashion as this.
Yeah, it's been interesting online. Everyone's pointing the finger at their ideological opponents and blaming them for this man's death. I mean, Cambridge University must have known that his claims were too good to be true, and yet it seems to me they wanted this fantastic story about the youngest ever black professor. And did they elevate this man to a point that he could never possibly sustain? And of course, it all came crashing down. Is that the big lesson out of all of this? I mean, we talk about the dangers of DEI. I don't want to be one of those pointing the ideological finger, but it's hard to see how that didn't contribute to this.
No, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the discussion about Jason Arday in recent days, or certainly before his untimely death, was about how Cambridge kind of threw out basic standards in promoting him. He didn't have a particularly solid academic record even before these plagiarism allegations surfaced. But there's also the kind of duty of care side. When you've got someone who, frankly, is quite clearly a fantasist, someone who's quite clearly making up these stories to kind of self-aggrandize himself, someone who is therefore going to have quite a delicate ego, to essentially collaborate in that, to lend them the kind of platform that they crave, even in the face of very obvious untruths, things that just kind of fail the sniff test without necessarily even needing to delve deep into whether or not they are actually correct, I think does raise questions about, if not their blame for what has happened, I wouldn't want to go that far in pointing the finger, then certainly lessons they should learn going forward to ensure that something like this never happens again.
Yeah, now, as you said, our heart goes out to his wife and 2 children. Tell me about the government's plan to house 1,200 male asylum seekers in the town of Piddington, population 350. As if that's not bad enough, some politicians are saying the government should go even further. Have a listen to former Conservative Government Minister Edwina Currie.
The obvious thing that 1,200 young men are going to need in the middle of a village like Little Piddington is a brothel. I don't think they're going to provide that. I have a feeling that's not going to be allowed.
Tom, I cannot imagine how upset 350 people in the little town of Piddington must be with the arrival of 1,200 male asylum seekers. What is the government thinking?
Oh, it's absolutely crazy, James. As you say, tiny little Piddington, this village in Oxfordshire. If this army base, which is going to be turned over to asylum seekers, gets the green light, it's going to dwarf their population by almost 4 times. I mean, this is utterly crazy. And if, Edwina Currie got away there, they'd also be landed with Oxfordshire's premier mega brothel to add, salt to the wound. So this is a very, very strange state of affairs. Piddington are actually kind of in open revolt over this. They're threatening to declare independence from the United Kingdom, entirely sort of symbolic, but it shows the strength of the feeling. And given this comes after Andy Burnham saying that essentially we need to share illegal migrants across the country, they shouldn't just be in the kind of poor areas where the hotels are cheaper, they should also be in leafy, affluent areas as well. I think he's going to find that the pushback is, if not as fierce, then certainly pretty irked in certain places of the country which haven't had to deal with the brunt of this issue so far, but places like Piddington are suddenly going to have to deal with it now.
There's something else I wanted to ask you about, and that is that the Home Office is looking into claims that the Chinese Communist government has been funding pro-Palestine protests in the UK. What can you tell us about that?
This is a really alarming development. It comes originally from congressional investigations in the US, which found that this feminist organisation called Code Pink had alleged links, potentially money coming its way from China via the husband of the founder of the campaign group. There's also Code Pink chapters in the UK, and our authorities looking specifically at £250,000 worth of donations, which might have been of dubious provenance. As we've known in recent years, countries like China, countries like Russia like to kind of play on the divisions within our own societies. It's certainly not inconceivable that they might have latched onto the hate marches as one way to do so. So very concerning.
I mean, one of the groups that it's thought that the Chinese government provided funds to organised for pro-Palestinian protesters outside military bases.
No, exactly. They even organised one on RAF at Kriteri in Cyprus. So it shows you the sort of reach of what otherwise isn't a particularly big or famous group in the UK, certainly. So it does raise a lot of questions. And it was also quite funny to see, this is primarily a feminist organisation, which seems most passionate about Gaza, which again is a bit of a cognitive dissonance there, we say. But yes, the fundamental thing be, where is this money coming from, and what, if anything, are the Chinese authorities looking to do here? And I think it is very much about stirring up dissension within Western societies.
We've only got just a couple of seconds left, Tom. Just in a couple of words, Andy Burnham, how's he going? Not great, I think it's fair to say. He's been benefiting from not being Keir Starmer, but already he's coming a cropper, certainly with some of the stuff he said on migration. Yeah, I kind of thought you might say that. Tom Slater, great to chat. Thanks for joining me. Trust you have a great week. That's it from me, but coming up right now, it's the brilliant Paul Murray. Enjoy.